Welcome back to another episode of the Breakneck Podcast, where Ian and I look at changes in technology from the perspective of people building products and companies. Ian is a longtime product leader and entrepreneur running Beppo. My company is called Pact. This week, we're going to be coming back to the topic of creativity with AI. And Ian, you have something called the 3-week problem. Break it down. What's this
Yeah,
concept and how can people use it?
yeah. So here's where it comes from. I have been a soccer coach for my kids for many, many years. And what I noticed was this 3-week cycle, right? What would happen is you tell a kid, hey, I need you to do this thing. And they'd look at you and go, I don't know why I need to do this. It's just coach telling me, it doesn't make any sense. So that would be the first week. The second week, they would try it and they're like, this is beginning to work for me. And then by the third week, they would have mastered that skill and they'd realize, oh, he asked me to do this because now I'm going to score more goals. I now get it. And I see that same pattern in the type of work that we do, which is a question pops up. I don't know why it's important, but it won't go away. And ultimately, when I kind of understand it, when I can frame it, I understand kind of where it fits in and there's real value in it. And that the 3-week problem that I have is, how does AI perform in the realm of creativity, and why is that important or not important in terms of where we're all headed here?
So,
So does that make, yeah.
connect the analogy to this child. So the idea of the 3-week problem is that I've seen this problem in my own life. Is I have collaborators, and my best ones, I give them a thing and they say, "Nah, I don't like it." And then 2 weeks later, mine is a 2-week, but I have some exceptional collaborators. They're not children. And it's 2 weeks later they come back and they just solved it. And I think there's that process internally, mentally that's happening. But how does that connect to what you're talking about with AI?
Well, so if I zoom out, I just like that 3-week problem because it shows up in a bunch of different places. The cadence isn't always right, but it's to characterize it. These are questions that bubble up in your mind, and you're like, it keeps coming back, and I need to understand this. I don't know why, but I need to understand it. And so we've multiple times over the last number of episodes talked about some element of creativity and novel. Last week we had Jeff in terms of the marketing stuff, right? Creativity shows up all the time in terms of what we do entrepreneurial, right? Whether it's artistic or not. And so um, I'm trying to understand, you know, is AI good? Are LLMs good at creativity? And what even is creativity? And so I actually spent a bit of time last week, and I went to an LLM. I went to Claude and I said, what the heck is creativity? You describe it for me. And it's, as Claude describes it, it's the ability to generate novel and valuable ideas, solutions, or expressions. So it's net new, right? It's also, as it describes it, it's making unexpected connections between seemingly unrelated topics, right? You would think that AI would be fantastic at doing that, right? It understands all the sort of written and digital learning that we have available. And you would think it would constantly come back and say, I know you're asking me this question, but that's the wrong question. When you combine these two things together, this is the real thing that is happening, right? And in what we're doing at Beppo, we're not actually seeing that. We're not actually seeing it come back and give brilliant ideas. And I don't know what you're seeing, but it begs the question, right? If it's not able to do that, does that mean that is kind of the most human aspect of what we do professionally, and that is a place that will remain kind of protected for us, and that'll be the differentiator for humans as we go forward? I don't know, but I'm interested in what you think about it.
I think these are just kind of like very rough sketches of what creativity could be. We don't have, like you said, we don't have like a good definition of it. But I would say that like creativity is much more about a determined effort to create new spaces for us to work in, new objects, new ways of coordinating with each other, new goals, and things like that. And I think AI is especially bad at that. It's actually pretty good at connecting disparate ideas, but just not in novel ways, because we're also creative and we've also done a lot of that throughout the years. There's just not that many novel connections. Maybe if it was 1915, you're a modernist literature, writer, you're going to have a lot of these like, oh, did you ever consider that this religion is like this religion, or this battle is like this battle?
Uh-huh.
You see a lot of that in literature of the early 20th century, but it's kind of played out. And I think similarly, that notion of creativity and
Sorry,
curiosity,
played out in what sense? Played out
the
in
idea
the.
that you can create by just finding things that already exist in the world and kind of just remixing them. I don't think that's what's going to happen. What you need to do to be creative now is say, I'm going to hold a space open so that new things can exist. And again, this is like, Matt, you're just talking in circles. Like, no, like it's a very different thing, and it's goal oriented. It's committing to saying this is going to be the way things are. It might have a creative element of realizing the connections and appropriations you can make from other parts of the world. But you really do need to say this, I am going to commit myself to making this happen. It's not something you're going to be creative and find something in the world. I think always, the artist maybe finds some inspiration, but then really commits to it and has to push and market it and bring it into something that other people agree with and then start orienting themselves around. Creativity is an intentional act. It is a act of work. It's not, it's, and I
Yeah, it
think
is.
that schoolyard idea of like, just be curious, just follow your passion, just be creative, just glosses over the intense amount of actual frustrating work once you've had that insight to making anyone else operate in a way that makes it real.
Yeah, we sometimes conflate ideation and creation, right? Ideation is that moment of the light bulb moment, right? And that's a little bit hard to manufacture. But creativity includes that ideation, but also the delivery of something ultimately. And maybe curiosity and ideation are very closely related, right? But in a professional situation, there is a goal, as you said, kind of multiple times there. You're doing this ideation, this creation in service of actually delivering something. And it's easy and tempting to think about big things that created, like, oh my God, you did a whole business around this awesome idea. Yeah. But I also created this spreadsheet that encapsulated all our thinking in a way that we hadn't thought of. And that was 10 minutes work, right? And so there's a huge amount of creation in our daily jobs, a huge amount. And every meeting we ever have is really about some sort of creating, whether it's creating common understanding or a spreadsheet or a new feature or a whatever. And I suppose the work I'm doing at the moment is leading me to really think deeply about, can AI actually do that? If it sat in a meeting and listened to our conversation, would it go, guys, I already know what to do here. You don't even need to finish this conversation. Would it ideate and create better than us? And the answer today is definitely not. And if it can't do that, then I don't know, ...
It's clearly getting better. To go back to our sense of what creativity is, which it's like, you can argue about semantics or grammar, but I do really think it's important to think about what creativity is. I'm often thought of as an ideas person. And I've heard that said. I'm not saying I'm good at it. Who knows? Like I definitely can come up with ideas. I'm not saying they're any good. But in past jobs, it's like, oh, we'll bring in Matt. He can be creative here in certain instances, right? And really, what we already have a group of people oriented around a goal who are just maybe stuck connecting some disparate, and you have somebody come in who has a broad-based knowledge and that kind of mindset for putting things together, creating systems and showing people how it all fits together. And that can be that creative spark that is very valuable, but maybe it's only the last 5%. And that's the problem, is then you become like a founder. You're all on your own, and you always have that ability to connect the dots. But then what you realize is that on its own almost does nothing for you. And I think that's where the AI is. It doesn't have all of those other elements to influence people, to be persistent over, years. You look at these things like, oh, these agents can accomplish tasks over like a 5-minute window or a 2-hour window. It's like the most, like, I feel like Pact, my current company, is the most obvious possible thing that anyone could do. I think it's just like, I'm only doing it because I feel like it has to happen, and it's obvious, and it's so straightforward. Years of intense focus effort to get anyone on board with it. And now we're seeing progress. It's great to see that it can work, but like, that's the gap right now. It's not 5 or 10 minutes of tool use. It's not replacing 2 or 3 tasks and then doing it over and over again. The thing that we're talking about is committing yourself to bringing something into the world over a long time. And that idea generation part is like minutes or hours. Like, it just seems like it comes to you naturally, like while you're taking a shower. And then everything else of building community and aligning all of these different parts of like a somewhat vague set of tools and capabilities that you have at your disposal takes years. It's like life's work type stuff. And I think that's what we're looking for with AI. And it's not even scratching the surface yet.
Well, and I agree with all of that, but I want to drill deeper on the creative aspect. It won't be surprised to hear that I'm thought of as an ideas person too, right? And I was thinking about I was talking to one of my brothers who's developing a new piece of software, and he has not done that type of thing before. And it was immediately apparent to me that you know, that kind of ideation and creativity and then kind of definition and rest is a learned skill too. And I've just been doing it for my whole career. And so I can sort of synthesize all this stuff together very, very quickly. So I don't know, you know, why that's important other than I'm really just, you know, to bring it back, really intrigued about the ability of the LLMs to deliver on this creative aspect. The other thing is I don't think they've been trained, to my knowledge, to actually be creative. If creativity is, if we just distill it down to sort of tying disparate pieces of information together and realizing, oh, there's something bigger when you tie these things. So they have not been trained to do that. So maybe that will happen in time, and that'll be the next sort of order of improvement in terms of LLMs, which is maybe a nice segue into what you wanted to talk about this week. We've seen some advancements and announcements from some of the LLM guys.
A bunch of new models came out, and they're all named in the most inscrutable way. All of them are massive improvements over what came before. And if you're pushing them to do not just creative, I think is to our previous conversation, they're not creative. They're great at helping you kind of organize, unlock, produce text. I've tried both with physics, and they're pretty good at physics. They have a lot better search capabilities. O3, if you have the $10 or $20 a month tier, you basically get unlimited, but it basically does deep research for you almost as well. Super smart. And then it also has the ability to incorporate, this is the thing I saw with O3 that was very aggressive, is they've had reinforcement learning on, for instance, Python use. So they know when and where to write short scripts or code to do math and other stuff like that, which radically changes how good they are at doing physics problems. And so I would give it just kind of like, you know, some absurd thing that came to mind, like how much Mylar would it take to reduce the temperature of Texas by 4 degrees, right? And like, you know.
Okay.
I'm sitting in the car with my daughter. I just have it on voice and I'm chatting with it. And came up with the number of launches and how much they would cost. Like it was able to go out and search for those things. And by using the math functionality, it was really grounded and it didn't hallucinate because it stayed really grounded in math. And I did some cosmology calculations and stuff like that. I'm not good at them. I just like, let's see what it could do.
None of us will know whether you're any good at it or not, Matt. You're probably the only person that's ever asked, you know, physics and cosmology questions in the same way.
The thing is, I have friends that actually became physics professors that are so much smarter than me that I have like at least that level of humility. But yes, I know that nobody can tell in an average cocktail conversation what I know and what I don't, because once you get past where somebody's physics ended, you really they just guess it if you're right or not. And I'm kind of at that level now with the O3. But to our previous conversation, very good at doing calculations. They seem pretty accurate. And the questions where I basically knew order of magnitude what the numbers should be, they were good. They pulled up good papers. They analyzed them pretty well. So it's just a huge step change. For physics, it's not doing physics at the level of one of my really smart friends that writes papers, but it's certainly, man, I would have loved it as a grad student in terms of doing research on papers and kind of getting to the core of the math and stuff like that, helping you check your math, all that stuff. It's all there. It's an incredibly powerful calculator and an incredibly good job at searching and synthesizing ideas. But to our point before, and this is what we kind of want to get to, is it just doesn't go further. It kind of just gets to the basics. And then instead of like really just saying, okay, I see where you're going and let me kind of like put some new moves on the board. This is what we could do. Did you ever think about this? And making like, you know, putting a stake in the sand of what we could do next. It kind of synthesizes what you said, some things that it read. It does some calculations that were obvious from your request. And then it stops. And I think part of that is the capabilities of the model, but part of that is just because, you know, I just spent $12 of, you know, compute on some stupid question that I came up with in the car. It's very impressive, but, you know, ChatGPT or OpenAI is going to run out of money if it raises $20 billion.
Yeah.
It keeps servicing those requests for 7 or 8 minutes instead of 40 seconds.
Yeah, it's you know, with my product glasses on, it's interesting because there are really two very different use cases for these LLMs. There's individuals interacting with them, and we get a sense of what they can do, what they can't do. And then there's a productized API type of interaction with it. And if you're trying to build a product, deliver a particular type of outcome from it's basically a complex set of steps that have to be chained together. And let me see if I can come up with a good analogy of describing this. So it's fun from a very personal human perspective to go and ask it a question, and it comes back with a very well thought out answer. That's great. But if you wanted to deliver, like I said, an outcome as a product, you have to provide some structure to it today. Now, it's my sense and my experience that as the better models come out, you can remove steps of that structure, right? We talk about hallucinations, right? Just as an example. And sometimes you go back and I need to refine my prompt and actually explicitly say this. If I was talking to a human, they would have understood that. They would have inferred that correctly. But today we're working on a product right now that probably has 10 prompts to get to the outcome that we actually want. The nirvana here is that there's only one prompt and it's able to work its way all the way through. But actually, now that I think about it, some level of creativity and a higher level of inference is actually required to actually get there. Now, it sounds like you played.
You said nirvana, and I'm going to use that as a clever segue to talking about mandalas or mandalas. I don't know exactly the pronunciation. You ever seen these things like some monk will create like a big square with symbols on all the corners, and it's super complicated, or they make like a rug or something like that. And a mandala, and I'll read it off of, is a geometric configuration of symbols. In spiritual traditions, mandalas may be employed to focus the attention of practitioners and adepts, a spiritual guidance tool. And I want to use the spiritual one because obviously, like, what is happening for AI is it's really good at things like coding, but it's also really good at like kind of everything in this vague sense. And we're not really ready for these new types of what you said, which is these structures that are going to guide and synthesize these conversations that we're having with these chat tools. Code bases are already a fantastic mandala for, again, focusing the attention of everybody onto the goal and keeping it aligned. And so you see a lot of progress in code generation with these tools precisely because you can create something and the structure can then be interacted with human beings. It can evolve and you can disengage, come back. You can work 10 minutes at a time and still make progress against it because it has this overall structure, right? And people talk about vibe coding and we talked about vibe architecture and things like that, is creating that structure. What we don't have any tools for, and really even a language or concepts, is the mandala for everything else. And so if you're talking about customer outcomes, just the type of terms that I've heard used, workflows, automations, playbooks, standard operating procedures, those are words I've heard used, but those are so linear and limited, and they're almost like inappropriate for describing what we want, which is, no, I want this incredibly crazy, unique, new type of intelligence tool that I can use to stay aligned with my customers and their goals, or to me and my goals. And talking about workflows is just like,
well, contrast that. I like that. Contrast that to your standard meeting invite as a mandala. And I'm not sure if I'm using it the right way. It's got
I'm just throwing a word out. Let's use that word.
So the time and place, the name of the meeting, and hopefully, please let there be an agenda, right? But that's about it. That's honestly about it. We get in the room and we all read the agenda, and then for the most part, we walk out of meetings having gotten some level of common understanding. So contrast code, which is so rigorous, like old school binary deterministic software, versus a meeting invite, right? And agents have to live somewhere in between there, the interface actually between both of those. And so we're having to work that out as product people delivering new products and new businesses. And then those agents are getting better, and the LLMs are getting better over time. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think last week we talked about, you mentioned something that I was thinking about. Every 10 years, it used to be every 10 years, the technology stack changed. So if you built the same business with a new technology stack, you could move quicker and you had an advantage over the incumbent because they couldn't just rewrite everything. That 10-year iteration is happening so much quicker. It's probably happening probably every 12 months now. Well, so it might be.
The thing about AI is, yes, the possible new standard is iterating 12 months. The adoption by industry is almost none, right? Like, taking, for example, what would be capable of structuring a communication in a meeting? Like, for instance, just requiring a minimum agenda, right? I have Google. How hard would it be to prompt the person who created the meeting, hey, what's this meeting about? And just let them talk. All the technology's been there for years, let alone what they have now, right? Doesn't happen. Because Google, in its interface with its users does not have a relationship with the user where anyone feels comfortable using Google's advice about how it should interact with people, because Google is notoriously shitty, and I'm using that word and swearing on our podcast and making it not appropriate for under 18. That's how bad Google is at interfacing with people, and everybody knows that. And so Google does not have the stance to say, hey, we're going to bring AI and actually create structure for a meeting. They just don't. I mean, Zoom similarly, like nobody really feels comfortable going in and doing anything other than doing transcripts and summaries. And even those summaries are weak. They're unsure of themselves. They come up with action items, but then they don't actually, Google could reach out with to everybody involved in the meeting. They have their email addresses. They have all kinds of interfaces with them. Do they interact? No, because they don't feel comfortable. They know that they would screw it up and that they would get huge blowback because they don't know what a meeting should do. AI is not going to be creative enough to come up with that. And I think that's where I'm always frustrated with AI. It's like, come on. Like, you know what a meeting's supposed to do. There's a goal. Have we made progress against the goal? And that's what I keep wanting these super smart companies to come up with. I mean, that's basically what Pact does. So, I'm going to always be on my horse. I'm just like, what were we supposed to accomplish? Did we accomplish it? What would be the main way we would ever accomplish something like that? It's just not a question that asks. It's kind of like, here's a technology, they throw it out. So yeah, there might be a platform change coming, but the platform change would actually need to include people using those platforms. And so from what I've seen from OpenAI and Anthropic and Google, maybe Anthropic with their little project management tools, nobody's really pushing any type of methodology for actually running companies. They have the tools, but they don't have that mandala of what is a business and what should it be. The number of times I hear the word, COS or some of the classics of like organizational theory, never. These people just aren't interfacing. So of course they're not going to be able to take this technology and make it the new Slack, because as bad as Slack is, it's at least to quote Lebowski, it's an ethos.
Yeah, I think that, look, I agree. I think there's a set of, I think in the future we'll look back at this stuff and we'll think of, Claude as a wrench, right? But we're building a car, right? Or to say it a different way, there's a presentation layer of a set of tools and their functionality and their utility that has to meet the user wherever they are and has to be consumable in a way that they can consume it. And that's going to be some UI or multimodal type of interaction, which is great. And that's actually relatively solvable, right? It's how what sits behind that is a combination of tools and frameworks and different things. And that's where the structure has to exist today, right? If there's 10 prompts today, because that's how good the LLMs are, so be it. In a year's time, we can eliminate 5 of the prompts. I'm using prompts to give some level of structure.
Interface with the human, where the human has to continue to push it forward.
Well, yeah, I'm actually thinking of if I think of a product which is interacting via API with Claude or whatever, it's got these prompts and it's wrapped structure around it, and maybe there's a voice interaction with the consumer. It'll remain being voice interaction, but you'll eliminate 10 of those prompts. You'll get down to 5 because the inference is better and it's able to do more stuff. And the value delivered via the voice interaction will be better for the consumer. But it's that sort of, maybe the analogy is falling apart now, but those 10 prompts going to 5 was sort of the equivalent of every 10 years, you got a new technology stack and you could deliver quickly. That's happening not every 10 years, it's happening every year now. And so
we get picky, but like I think there's something very particular about platforms is that they have a huge amount of buy-in and that there are network effects and defensibility of the platform due to their widespread usage and just acting as a common mode of interaction between people.
What's the platform though in this?
Technology of value improving in real time, but until there are social conventions that are based off of that change in the number of prompts, right? It's still it's still in the lab. It's like an API before you release it to customers. Once you release an API to customers, you're really responsible for versioning it and maintaining it and preserving it. But until then, if it's just internal, you can change the API responses all you want. And I think we're still in that lab phase. I don't think we're in a phase where
I agree.
anything matters about the way that AI is being used from a platform perspective, because there's no social impact to it yet. It's more people using it in miniature.
Yeah, I think maybe just to wrap up the point, I'm thinking about a product that is enabled by an LLM back here, and then prompts, and then structure, and all of that stuff is changing. I don't think the user gives a shit, basically. I think just the challenge for us in the industry is how to kind of, it takes 6 months to work out how to use this stuff. And if it's changing every 6 months, it's just, I don't know what that means. Maybe it just means new entrants to the market have equally as a good chance as, maybe a better chance than incumbents like us, even though we're not really incumbents in the traditional sense, but we're in the market, right, for a little while. And the tools are changing so quickly that you might be better to come in, 6 months from now when the tools are an order of magnitude better.
Yeah, I mean, as weird as it sounds, like we could still all be way too early. It's like, we're in the Palm Pilot moment, not the iPhone
Yeah.
moment. And
Yep.
even,
Yep.
even the iPhone, it started out with they pushed the graphics really to the edge of what the iPhone could do in terms of refresh rates and how fast animations happen and the type of images they could serve. And you got the skeuomorphic. Remember like the Johnny Ive skeuomorphic version of apps on the iPhone? And then Google came along and really wanted a much more general type of Android apps, which of course the Android supported a much lower end of the market. And so they came up with like material design. This is my conspiracy.
Flat
So I'm
design.
just
Yeah.
coming up off the top of my head, is that a lot of the minimalism that Google pushed in their app store was to support devices that couldn't support that same level of interaction. Well, we moved well past the technological capabilities that kind of constrained app design at that moment, but still so many of those app interface grammars that were ways of interacting that we're so familiar with came from 2012 or 2010, that it's still locked in 15 years later. It's probably not going to go anywhere for a long time. And to your point about how people use AI is changing so fast that I think everyone's constantly, we talked about prompt engineering, and now we don't really talk about it that much because it's kind of wrapped into the reinforcement learning that's happening now. So you don't really have to worry about the prompt. It kind of gets to your point. But there will be that point where things kind of freeze into place. And we haven't approached it yet. So I think that's what we'd be looking for, is when do things freeze? Or do we get, and this would probably be our next episode, to get to the singularity and things never freeze. And we just are falling down a well, and there's never going to be stability ever again, and things are going to continually change, and we'll never have another moment of clarity, and things will just start changing faster and faster, and that's that. Which, yeah, I don't have a really good counter argument to, so we'll have to talk about that more.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll leave it on that cliffhanger because we did decide we're going to talk about this next week. So maybe we'll just wrap it right
Yeah, that's
there.
good. Good place
And
to stop. The destruction of all meaning and purpose for everybody in the near future.
okay. Well, hopefully not before next week because we do want to actually do the
And
podcast on
we'll have
that.
a run for next week. Also,
Okay.
anybody, I mean, like, just look at all the jobs out there. This is my preview of my argument next week. Look at all the people out there doing all of these jobs, none of them affected by AI yet. We still have a long, long way for adoption. We're assuming it's going to be fast, and it's probably going to be painful, just like all of the other technologies before. But lots to talk
And
about.
there is, and even within AI, there's a tremendous amount of work to be done to harness it. There's so much work to be done.
Yeah, and that's the
So,
point of this podcast. By the way, everybody, if you made it this far, please subscribe. I see your name on YouTube or on Spotify or on LinkedIn when you subscribe or follow. And I personally like every single one of you more after you've done that. So please do that right now. I will see your name and I'll think to myself, what a nice person.
there we go.
That's my commitment to you if you follow and subscribe. Ian, thanks a lot. I'll see you next
Thanks,
week.
Matt. All right. Well, let's wrap it there. See ya.